Good evening and welcome to the Ogden City Council meeting for Tuesday, August 20th, 2013. Let the roll call reflect that all council members are present. We'll now turn the time over to Vice Chair Garner for the Pledge of Allegiance.
It's our pleasure tonight to have Jaden Van Hoosier from Troop 185, and he's going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. And it's also an honor that he is the grandson of our council member, Susie Van Hoosier. So Jaden, we'll turn the time over to you.
All right, I'm Jaden Van Hoosier, and I'm on Troop 185, and here we're going to do the Pledge of Allegiance. So will the audience please rise and repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaden.
Thank you, Jaden. We'd now ask that you join us in observing a moment of silence. Thank you. First up is approval of minutes. First are the minutes of the work session of December 11th, 2012, the work session of January 29th, 2013, and the regular meeting of April 16th, 2013. Councilmember Heyer.
Yes, Chair Blair, I have read those minutes and found them to be accurately representing the content of those meetings.
And the minutes of the work session of April 2nd, 2013, and the regular meeting of April 2nd, 2013. Vice Chair Garner.
Yes, Chair Blair, I have reviewed those minutes and found them to be correct to the best of my recollection.
And the minutes of the special meeting of November 13th, 2012, and the work session of February 5th, 2013. Councilmember Stevens.
Yes, Mr. Chair, they're correct.
And minutes from the joint study session of May 28th, 2013, the regular meeting of May 21st, 2013, the joint study session of May 7th, 2013, and the special meeting of September 11th, 2012. Vice Chair Garner again.
Yes, Chair Blair, I have reviewed those minutes and found them to be correct.
And the minutes of the study session of April 2nd, 2013, the closed executive session of April 2nd, 2013, the joint study session of April 23rd, 2013, and the work session of April 23rd, 2013. Councilmember Wicks.
Thank you, Chair Blair. I reviewed those minutes and they are correct.
And the minutes of the study session of February 5th, 2013, the regular meeting of February 5th, 2013. Councilmember Van Hoosier.
Chair Blair, I've reviewed these minutes and find them to be correct, and I move that we approve all the above minutes.
I'll second.
We have a motion from Councilmember Van Hoosier to approve the minutes and a second from Councilmember Heyer. This is a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes. Next up is a request to be on the agenda, and it's a presentation of the Sunset Report from the Christmas Village Committee.
Joe Packham will be giving that. She's the chair.
Thank you, council members, for allowing us to make our presentation here and to resubmit to be reauthorized for another 3 years. I know that you all received our accomplishments and have read them. I don't need to go over them in great detail except to say that every year the opening ceremonies becomes larger. We have more fireworks. We have many more people attending. It's become quite a grand event. We've been very lucky in the last couple of years. The weather's been good to us, and the better the weather, the more people we have. But we're happy about that. The village is such a great thing for the community because 3 different organizations each night, 4 nights a week, present musical numbers on the stage. They're all schools, and the students and the teachers look forward to doing that. Their parents all come. So that's a way of involving the community. The business community has helped us a great deal in building the cottages and funding the different static displays. One of our goals for the future is to raise donations to increase the static displays so the park has more lighting in the darker areas and things like that. Every year we have 3 or 4 companies come to us who want to build new cottages, and so they take that over. We're improving all the cottages in the Parks Department, and Ernie have overseen the repair of the cottages. We still have some of the original cottages, so they've been repaired and updated, and we're working on movable parts because that's the part that the children all like. So, and the economy's coming back, so lots of people are interested in this year in doing new things to their cottages and making them even better. We have Mrs. Santa who comes, and the preschool and grade school children come and go through tours of the park. We have over 700 of those. We give away about 9,000 candy canes to the children who sit on Santa's lap, and we take their pictures. We built a train for our 50th anniversary, which is for the children to ride. We wanted to do something so that there was things the kids could do while they were waiting for Santa, because the line gets kind of long. So if they can ride the train, that kind of breaks it up. And then we built the storytelling tent last year, and it takes us a couple of years to get everything off the ground and ready to go, but we're working on improving that this year so that the kids can go in where it's warm and it's heated, and there are professional storytellers who actually read books to them and tell them Christmas stories, and then books are donated so that each child can take a book home with them when they go. So the future plans are, like I said, more static displays, more, a few more cottages. We're working on improving the cottages we have more than building new ones, because we want them all to be fabulous. The Parks Department puts up about 400,000 lights in the park and down 25th Street for the people who come. We estimate that we have about 100 to 150,000 visitors each season through the park that come to see the park and walk through. So we feel it's an integral part of our community and something we can be very proud of having. And so we would like you to reestablish us for 3 more years. Can I answer any questions? Or I could stand up here all night and brag about the village, so I'll be brief. But any questions?
How long has the village been going with the organization?
From the very beginning. Huh? 1962, and it was run by Downtown Ogden Business Association for several years, and then it kept going, but it didn't grow, and because of the renovation of the amphitheater and all of that, there was a time when it struggled a little bit, and then we took over. I took over as chair 11 years ago, and there were only about 9 cottages originally, and I think we have over 63 now. So it's grown tremendously since we took over. I have a fabulous committee. It's a really hard-working, dedicated committee that really does do more than their share for the community, I feel.
Thank you.
Joe, you've done a fantastic job. So.
Thank you. I would love to take credit, but it's the group, really. Nobody does this by themselves. The city is phenomenal in their support, and all of you are. We couldn't do it without you. And like I said, we have a real hardworking committee. There's no one who just sits on the committee. They all have jobs and they do it. So it's a very much a group effort, but thank you. We'll all take your...
Joe, the one suggestion I'd have that I've heard through Crossroads of the West and several other committees and people talking, this year is the 50th year of It's a Wonderful Life, the movie.
Right.
And so I've heard a lot of people say they can remember as children going down 25th Street where they had the lights strung back and forth across the street. And they were wondering, since the buses no longer are allowed to go down 25th Street, if that's a doable project. So it's just a thought, because it would be a really cute thing to do with the movie in coordination. And your theme this year, I think, kind of rings true to that, doesn't it?
I think so, too. That's a great idea. We love your recommendations, because that's how we get better and we grow. And now with UDOT, we can do a few more things like that, so we'll check into that. That's a really good idea. We could probably show the movie itself at the Egyptian Theater as well, so we could tie it all in together. So We love our village.
Good, we do too.
Thank you very much.
Actually, I have one more thought for you.
Excuse me. Sure.
That's okay. And just adding to it, amazing what you and your committee have done. Just a thought, we have a pretty big effort going for College Town sorts of activities, and it would be nice to see Weber State represented.
That's a really good idea. You know what happens is, I have to say we try things, and then they don't work very well, so they kind of go by the wayside and you don't try them again. So it's always nice when you guys remind us of that, because I agree, we would very much love to have Weber involved, the university, and everything they're doing up there, because it is those young students and the young parents and that can participate in all of our events for free. So it's really nice for them. So we'll do that for sure. I'll follow up on both those things. Anybody else? We love your ideas, so just email me. Thank you. Is everybody done?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Thank you. Next up is proposed ordinance 2013-40, amending sections of the municipal code. Will there be a...
Perry will make a brief presentation about the ordinance.
Mr. Chair, members of the council, thank you. As Ms. Packham explained, Christmas Village is very vital to Ogden and Ogden City, and it's one of the historic events that we support every year, and it means a lot, not only to Ogden City, but the surrounding community. And so with that, we've seen it grow leaps and bounds, especially under Ms. Packham's leadership. And so with the idea behind this ordinance change is that there would be a shared load, instead of it being just placed upon the chair and then allowed for the chair to dictate that it would be shared amongst a chair and a vice chair. And so there would be a common leadership, and it could be a kind of a branched and kind of a carry load, and it could be dispersed more evenly. And the ordinance change, in simplistic terms, is that we would then adopt that we would have every year, we would have a chair and a vice chair, and they'd be voted upon by members of the committee to establish that leadership role throughout the year.
Also a past chair.
Correct. And a past chair that would remain.
Questions? Thank you.
That, I would, if there's no further discussion, I would make a motion that we adopt proposed ordinance 2013-40, amending the sections of the municipal code that pertain to the Christmas Village Committee.
I'll second it.
We have a motion from Councilmember Wicks to adopt proposed ordinance 2013-40 and a second from Councilmember Van Hoosier. This is a roll call vote.
Councilmember Gochner?
Aye.
Councilmember Heyer?
Aye.
Councilmember Stevens?
Aye.
Councilmember Van Hoosier?
Aye.
Councilmember Wicks?
Aye.
Vice Chair Garner?
Aye.
Chair Blair?
Aye. That passes.
Can I interrupt just a second?
Sure.
There's one thing that I would request too, and that is that we keep a good history. It seems like Ogden does all these wonderful events and we have all this going on, and then it seems like when it's over, it's over. And I think it's a wonderful memory to go back, and I just received a tape of the 1947 Ogden Pioneer Days Parade, and it's absolutely wonderful to see. So I'm just suggesting to the committee that maybe you do keep a good running history of what's gone on and what the future plans are. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have one item under common consent, and it's the consideration of the reappointments for the Christmas Village Committee.
If there's no further discussion, I'll make a motion that we adopt the Christmas Village Committee.
I'll second.
We have a motion from Councilmember Gochner and a second from Councilmember Heyer to adopt the Christmas Village Committee. This is a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes.
And we appreciate all of these reps being here tonight, too.
Yeah, we do. You
Just
guys do a
getting
lot of
ready.
work.
Now
Make us
the work
look good.
begins.
And Joe, this is your whole committee, or part of them right here with you, correct?
Yeah, they're here. They go everywhere.
Well, thank you for all you do. Next up is public hearings. First up is a presentation on the sewer and water and storm sewer revenue bonds.
Chair, Mr. Stratford will start, and then Laurie Johnson will And then we have a host of experts in case there's questions they can't answer.
So in your packet, you received a list of questions and answers dealing with this particular issue and the choice that's been placed before you tonight and kind of what your options are. That's been talked about in a number of meetings. I don't really intend on going through those point by point. I might address a couple of them, but if there's anything in that question and answer document that you feel like needs to be addressed, please let me know and I'll be happy to address those items. To start off with, just a quick summary about the need for this bond. And I hope that this whole presentation doesn't take too long because of the amount of time you've already put into this. But the current bond proposal for about $13.5 million allows the city water department to construct a new water treatment plant for about $11.6 million, to complete the installation of the automatic meters for $1.5 million, and then has a small piece, about $250,000, for some water line replacement. These projects, as you're well aware, cannot be completed with the available cash on hand, even if we used 100% of our cash on hand. And if we tried to do that, not only would we not have enough money, but we would violate both the joint resolution that you adopted with the mayor a year ago addressing the financial policies of the water utility, and in fact some of our bond covenants from prior bonds that require us to maintain money to make payments on those bonds, and also some covenants that we have in particular with the state of Utah that we will have some money in a construction reserve fund. And so the short answer is that's the need. We don't have the money to pay for it, which is why you're being asked to consider bonding for these projects. As usual, the water utility and every utility always has more needs, has more projects that it needs to do than it has money. And so one of the questions that I think is logical to ask is, well, do we have a principled way of determining when we bond versus when we don't bond? Because we have so many projects out there, we could issue $100 million in bonds and still not be able to catch up probably with all the things we need to do. And that is answered really in two ways. First of all, it's answered from the original vision that started in 2008, that there would be bonding done for particular big projects that serve major portions of the city. And if you look at it that way, the original bond paid for new storage at 9th Street, as well as additional storage on 36th Street and transmission lines connecting all of those functions together. It included money for well rehabilitation and well investigation. All of those are examples of items that if they were to go out of service would affect very large portions of the population. That bond also indicated that there was an awareness that the Canyon water line itself needed to be replaced and that the water treatment plant needed to be replaced, but that those would have to be addressed in subsequent years. And again, those are both examples of large-scale items that serve the entire community. And so that's really, I think, the philosophy that the water department has adopted in determining when does it come to you for bonds, is these large-scale projects. As we deal with individual neighborhood projects, even though there's lots of them out there that need to be done, I think the goal has generally been to try and pay for those out of annual revenues and operating revenues and the money that's available from year to year. And then one other brief update on the 2008 bond is that next week you'll be getting a complete report on the status of the funds from that bond. And not to get too far ahead, because that will take quite a while, or I don't know exactly how long, as long as you want, but it'll take some time to discuss each of the projects that were funded, whether each project was over or under, and how much money still remains to be spent under that bond. But it's important that you do understand that report will give you two pieces of information. One is that when you look at the money that was originally allocated from those bond proceeds, about $800,000 of that money has not been spent. That's not to say that there's not plans for it to be spent, it just hasn't been spent yet, because as you're doing $48 million worth of projects, you don't want to commit to things that you're not going to have money for, and so there is some money that still remains to be spent into that bond. One other thing that has happened, or that you'll be asked to discuss, is to address the fact that as that money was being used, it was also accruing interest at the bank that was holding those funds for us. And the total amount of interest that accrued on that bond issue was about $1.5 million. Now, a portion of that is allocated to the sewer department who participated in that bond, and a portion is allocated to the water department. The water department's portion is roughly, I think, about 80%, or about $1.2 million. And again, if you look at this is a copy of the offering statement that went with the 2008 bond, and it identified these large-scale projects and identified the need to address major water mains throughout the city. In order to be consistent with that document, my understanding is that the proposal will be, and your discussion at that time will be, about how to spend that $1.2 million on transmission line issues, and the primary one is likely to be Monroe Boulevard in the north end of the city, where you've already heard about some serious issues out there with leaks. And so from the administration's perspective, they don't see that issue as directly related to what you're talking about tonight, because it doesn't include the same projects, but it is information that you should be aware is coming to you next week for your discussion. One other point that I think, or two other points that are important to keep in mind, is that when some people look at the proposal to bond for these projects, they will frequently ask two questions. One is, why don't we take money from other utility funds? And the second is why don't we cut other city services, or why don't we look for other places in the city to save money so we can pay for these projects? And the answer is that each of these utility funds, as you're well aware, operates independently as an independent operating entity. And as an enterprise fund, it's responsible to cover its own costs, to bring in revenue to cover capital projects. And as a result, it doesn't participate, the water, for example, doesn't participate with storm sewer, nor does it participate with the sanitary sewer, and it shouldn't be taking money out of general city funds. And as a result, this bond is solely based on water, in the case of water, and solely based on storm sewer in the case of the storm sewer bond. And so that's why there's no discussion about taking money from other places to cover those costs. And the other one is whether or not there's going to be an increase in people's water rates. As the question and answer document explained, the financing, or the rate schedule that was adopted by the council last year set rates, established a rate increase that was phased in over 3 years, and there's no proposal that those rates would be changed or increased in any way. We'll just continue collecting the rates the way that have already been authorized.
But weren't those set assuming that our interest rate on the bonds, the future bonds, would be lower than what it's looking like it's going to be?
The rates were set based on all of the needs of the water utility.
But they were also set assuming a 4.1% interest rate.
There are a variety of assumptions, yes.
Yeah.
I believe that if you look at the financial model, that there's a 4.1% rate plugged in there for what that would take. And the answer is that rate, as well as a number of other items in there, can vary. For example, there's an assumption of what the consumer price index will be. Consumer price index is not going to follow exactly what that model says. And so when you look at all of those, they're either going to balance each other out, or as it becomes if it becomes apparent that there's any kind of a problem, you would have to make a year-to-year correction to address that issue. But yes, I think that was the assumed interest rate.
But whether we pass the bond or not, the rate is still going to go up.
No. Well,
the basic rate will.
The third phase of the increase that you approved last year will go into effect next year, but there will be no new rate increases.
That's right.
As a result of issuing this bond.
But the rate increase is already built into the system there.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, so all of the costs have been built in, and quite honestly, the system if there's a slight difference in interest rates on the bond itself, we'll have to adjust to that in whatever way it needs to make adjustments, which I don't think, quite honestly, is going to be any significant.
Well, I think there
difference.
is a significant difference between 4.1% interest and 4.7% interest over the life of the bond. I mean, that's millions of dollars that we're paying in interest that could be going to projects that is going into interest instead.
And that actually leads directly into the next point that I wanted to make, which is really there's a spectrum of opinions or ways of looking at how much you bond for and how long you bond. And in this particular case, if we look at just the income stream or the amount of money associated with these projects, and you say, okay, if we do the full $13 million, $13.5 million, we will likely pay a slightly higher interest rate because it'll be if you're doing it for 30 years, and we will have more total interest payments over time. If we were to issue a smaller bond, then we would have potentially lower interest rate, especially if it was for a shorter period of time, and potentially have that revenue stream available in the future. But I think one of the critical things to understand about that is that if you lower the amount that you bond for, and if your decision is to say we're going to wait to make that money available to be used in the future, you're waiting for 20 years to pay off the bond before you're going to be able to have that revenue stream available for projects. In the meantime, the initial project that you might have funded is going to go up in price. And so by the time you get to year 20 and your revenue stream is available, you are going to not be having 100% of that money available. You're going to have to actually pay more for that project at that point, and there's no guarantee that that trade-off is going to give you more projects. And quite honestly, at the end of 30 years, the water department, what the water department cares about is how many projects did it get done in 30 years. It plans out, it gets to that date, and it looks back and says, what were we able to accomplish? If you paid a little bit more in interest, but you were able to get the same number of projects or more projects done, the water utility is just as well off as if it paid less interest and had to pay more money for that project later on, and in fact is better off if you're able to build the project at the very beginning to complete all those projects because you've gotten the use of it for the full 30 years. If you wait for that income stream to become available 20 years down the road, you're only going to get 5 or 10 years use out of that. And so while I don't want to downplay the importance of the amount of the bond or the interest rate associated with it and the timing, there are legitimate points on both sides of the spectrum that can support a conclusion that you should bond for more up front, even though you're going to have higher interest payments, total interest payments. I should clarify that one other question I think that's been asked is if there was some change to the amount of the bond or the timing or the length of the bond, are we still going to do the 3 projects that have been identified? And the assumption is yes, we're going to do all 3 of those projects regardless of whether you approve a lower amount or not. But the effect would be if you approved a lower amount, those projects would have to be paid out of cash on hand, which I think Ms. Johnson can probably address if you have questions about exactly how that would work. So that's essentially all I wanted to say about the bond on the storm. I mean, excuse me, on the water. If there are any questions about that, I'd like to answer those at this time. Otherwise, I'd go to the storm sewer.
In our work session, you mentioned that the water department came to you and asked for funding for a project, and you said no, they could not do that because they didn't have any funds to complete that project. Was that correct on that?
That's correct. On the Monroe Boulevard project out on the north side of the city between about 2nd and 7th Street, they had prepared a bid that they wanted to go out and get bids on with the expectation that money would be available for that. And the answer was that at that time there was insufficient money in their budget that had been allocated, because they only got $250,000 last year, $250,000 this year. The Monroe Boulevard project's about $1 million project. So they actually couldn't go to bid on that particular project that needed to be done because they didn't have enough money allocated in their CIP accounts. And that's actually where next week's discussion will come into play about at least being able to address that particular project getting that project going, and then any other projects behind that moving up in priority so that they can get done. But that's correct. I really don't have a lot to say about the storm bond, except that you may have noticed if you've looked at the financial model that contains information about the storm bond projects, and really it's only going to pay for one project, or at least a portion of one project. That bond for storm sewer will pay for the line that runs down Harrison Boulevard to the Ogden River. That project's going to be about a $5.5 million project. The bond is only for $4.5 million. The difference will have to be paid out of cash on hand. But if you look at that total model, you can see that after about 4 years, the model doesn't show additional capital expenditures. And a question that might come up from that is, well, if there are no capital expenditures after 2018 or 2017, why are we bonding today to do this if we can just wait? And the answer is that, if you recall, you approved a master plan for storm sewer that addressed capacity issues only. And those were laid out over about a 4 or 5 year time frame to be completed. But last year, I believe it was last year, you also funded a full-scale master plan for the storm sewer that's going to address more than just capacity issues. It's going to address all of the pipe conditions. And that will be coming back to you in the next year or so. And then all of those projects that are going to be needed to be done will be added into the financial model going forward. And so it's not like there's a cutoff and suddenly we just have lots of money with no projects. There will be projects, it's just that they haven't been identified and quantified yet. And a good example of that is, if you recall, when there was some discussion about the storm sewer system, you saw a picture of a pipe under 2nd or 4th Street, I can't remember, with a big dent in it. 2nd Street. You saw a picture of a big pipe, and because of road pressure or whatever, it was starting to kind of cave in. Well, that's not going to be addressed as a capacity issue. That's an example of a project that will be addressed when we do the full analysis. And so you'll see that, and so that money is needed to take care of the immediate concerns of the storm sewer system and allow it to move forward with its projects. Any other questions?
No other questions, but maybe you can just verify this. We do have the master plan for the sewer and water revenue, but in our work session, it's over 100 projects that have been identified and approximately $35 million. So this bond tonight is just a small portion of that whole master plan.
Yes, that's correct. If you recall, I didn't bring the numbers today with me. The original master plan you approved had projects for pressure, fire flow, and other distribution issues that were in the tens of millions of dollars. And now you're getting the piece that talks about leaks. And that's another $35 million in projects. And so the goal and the process will be to build all of that into the financial model. But yes, the need far, far, far outstrips the capability to address those concerns. Thank you.
So if the city goes out and bonds, say, into the future, that bond issue may be at a higher rate of interest than what we're considering today.
Yeah, and I didn't address that, but so historically, bond rates have been very low in the last couple of years, and we've seen them creeping up a little bit. But if you still look at the historical price of money, if it's 5% or 4.7% or 4.5% or 4.1%, any of those numbers is a really good deal for borrowing money compared to what you would have looked at historically. And that's actually another argument about why you would potentially want to support the bond for the higher amount today, because you're getting money, although not at the amount that was projected in the financial model, you're getting it at an amount lower than you would reasonably be able to expect to get that in the future, and gives you more flexibility, gives you the ability to complete more projects at a lower cost of borrowing.
But we don't know. I mean,
no.
We don't have crystal balls. We don't know. It could go up. It could go down.
The projection would be at a higher rate than what it is today.
Yeah, all you can look at is kind of historical data, and certainly if you have specific questions about that, Laura Lewis would be able to answer those. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Council. I just wanted to take just a few minutes and clarify some of the numbers in the fund balance and make sure that you understand where those numbers came from and how the numbers that we used in the model to update the model and to move forward were obtained from. And so to start with, I'd like to go to this slide, and I apologize, this is very small, but it's important to go over these numbers. And the first one I'd like to clarify is where it says fiscal year 12. So I'm looking at the first number to your left. It says $8.779 million. This number came from the fiscal year 2012 Certified Audit Financial Report, the CAFR. Okay, so that's a number that we know that had been audited, that had been derived through the whole process. As we go to skip the next column and go to the next two columns as we look at the use of fund balance for fiscal year 2013 and the return to fund balance for fiscal year 2013. And basically what these numbers are is the use of fund balance says we're going to use this much out of that fund balance. So if you look at the 8.7, we would take 1.785 to use for retained earnings for capital. Then we would increase this return to retained earnings by over $3.2 million, as you see in the next column. The first point I'd like to clarify on these two columns is the number that was in the fiscal year 2013 adopted budget was $1.65 million less. So this number, which is based not on the Lewis Young Comprehensive Financial Study, but it's based on the fiscal year 2013 adopted budget. And this number does take into account that we expect the revenues at the end of the day. And these, let me clarify very quickly. This is, and I put this up here, unaudited preliminary fiscal year 2013 data for a reason. It's not the end of the day data. It's going to change. There are many, 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 many adjustments that are going to be made over the next several months as we go through, all of the field work with the audit and all of the adjustments. You might note that a government entity by law is required to keep their books open for 45 days after the end of a fiscal year. So Friday, we actually were able to officially close our books as of just Friday. If you remember, I tried to put these numbers together for you a couple of weeks ago. You know, a lot of things have even changed since then. As you accrue things back, we still have expenses to be accrued, et cetera. However, I did try to project that we expect our revenues at the end of the day to be a little over $900,000 higher than was in the adopted budget, and expenses to be approximately $700,000 lower. That accounts for this higher number that would go into retained earnings. And so if you looked at the projected fund balance for fiscal year 2013, just using that information, it shows a fund balance of over $10 million. Now, if you don't look forward to fiscal year 2014, there's a critical point, a critical transaction that happened a few weeks ago that has to be taken into account. And as you remember, a few weeks ago, the council authorized the use of $1.5 million of projected fund balance, the money that was going into retained earnings, in fiscal year 14 to be used for an emergency purpose, to fix a water line. So if you took that $10 million, it stood alone, you've got to reduce it by the $1.5 million that you authorized for the emergency, and that would reduce it to $8,736,953. But if you look ahead to fiscal year 14 and include those numbers, which are projections, based on the fiscal year 14 adopted budget, again, those are the budget numbers, we would increase the fund balance by another $100,000. That $1.5 million has been taken into account in those numbers, and the adopted fund balance, as we see it at the end of fiscal year 14, based on the information that we have at this point in time, would be a little over $8.5 million. The reason that's important is when you receive the very, very initial projections based on your options, the fund balance was much, much lower. But we used this $8.5 million to reset that model, if you will, in projecting days of cash on hand and in looking at the available cash and those kinds of things. But I wanted to be very clear on where this number came from and how we derived this number. And so that is the number that's been used in the options that were presented. And very quickly, I just wanted to And I know that you received this in your packet. These are the numbers of the water bond. I think I skipped a slide. Okay, it's not showing up for me. These are the options that you received. And I'll go back to this. Are there any questions on this? I know you've been over it before, and I don't mean to be redundant. I apologize if it is. I just wanted to clarify where those numbers came from very quickly.
I don't know if you need to review the plus and minuses just briefly of each of the options that are there, just basically going through that.
We can go over those, and here are the options, and I appreciate that.
What sort of interest rates are you basing these assumptions
These are the 4.1% interest rates.
Which we're not going to get for 20 or 25
Can I clarify one thing very quickly? 25 you never get one interest rate across an entire bond series.
Yeah.
And we knew going into this, you've got to have a base rate to base your assumptions on. It gives you a point in time and a point of reference is what it's going to give you. And we've been very clear that we already know that the 30-year bond is going to cost much more, and even that 5-year span between 25 and 30 years is a much higher interest rate than the first years of a bond. So one bond will not have one interest rate anyway. And what was done in the model, and it's just a model and just a projection, was to use 4.1% interest to give a point of reference for all of the bonds at one place. And is that going to change? It will change with every one of those bond issues, and it's going to depend on the day that the bond goes to market and what the exact interest rates will be. But what this does is give you a point in reference to look at the debt service based on one interest rate. And you're right, it's going to be different across the bond, but it would be very, very difficult to pull in every scenario that every bond could have with every interest rate that could be applied.
I realize that, but with the longer term bonds, it's not accurately representing what we're going to be paying.
And probably not the lower term bonds either, exactly, because you've got to look at the very beginning years of the bond, because that's going to be different. They're going to be much lower. But what this does is gives you a point of reference for every one of these assumptions so that you can evaluate them across the board.
If we're using this to also compare what our total cost of issuance of the bond is going to be and what we're going to pay in interest, this is not the best way to do that because it's not accurately reflecting the differences in interest rates that we're going to have for a 20, 25, or 30-year bond.
I believe it's as accurate as you can get for the life of an entire bond across the board. Is it going to be completely accurate? No. It will be different for every one of those issues when it goes to the market. If you look at each one of the options, and option 1 was the very initial bond, for 30 years, the entire amount, as Mark Stratford described. And we can speak to each one of these, and the benefits, there are pros and cons, and it depends on what your philosophy is. The reality is there's never enough money to do everything you want with every project you want, and I think Mark Stratford explained that very clearly. And so the object is to find the right balance. What is the right balance of debt and the right balance of cash on hand in order to cover any kind of emergencies that might come up, any kinds of, and these other projects that need to be done. We are well aware that there's a healthy fund balance right now, and very grateful for that, if you will, because then you're probably not going to be bonding into the future. You're going to be able to get Monroe done and some of these other projects done with cash on hand. However, in order to pay for the filtration plant and the meters and these other things that have been proposed, the administration believes that bonding is the best way to go about initially funding those projects and then using cash on hand for all of these other leak data projects and all of these other capital improvement projects. Obviously, the lower the bond and the lower the term, the interest that you pay, as Councilmember Wicks stated, is going to be much lower. And to quantify that for every bond in dollar is very, very difficult to do. However, it's obvious just from this very simple chart that you're going to pay much less based on this shorter term and on a lower bond. So it's going to be depending on if you want to put those projects out. And one argument has been, well, you can pay for those projects with the interest that you save. If you're willing to wait to queue those out to 20 to 30 years, that's fine. That's when that money would be available. And you can look at them those way. I don't want to go through each one individually because I think you've reviewed those very carefully, and I know that you've had this data for some time.
But our debt service is going to be higher on those bonds that have, we're going to have a higher payment because it's going to have a higher interest rate. It's not going to be the 4.1%.
Unless you stretch it out across the number of years, and then that lowers it down some. And you can see the difference in the debt service payments, and I think Council Chair Blair brought that out between, he was kind of adding and subtracting between some of those the other day about what those debt service payments would be. But you can see the difference between those. And I tried to add some colors to this so you could kind of differentiate between the various options that are presented.
I don't think we're really comparing them fairly if we're making the assumption with this table that they're all going to have the same interest rate.
And I've spoken to that they're not going to have. And I can't, I don't know how to make that more clear or to answer that any differently.
I think the other element is the cash on hand of each options that we have here is that we have to review those elements to see if one is better than the other or none of them are adequate for us in this
Well, and as
case.
you can look at these scenarios, option 4 is the one that goes to the lowest approximate days of cash on hand, and that's an important point, and I appreciate you bringing that up. And option 5 shows the highest one at the get-go. So you can see a difference. They range from 180 to 200 days for option 4, 300 days down to 240 days of cash on hand for option 5. And as the council has passed by policy, they very critically don't want to get below, initially it was set at 150 days, but knowing that you really needed to be at 180 days, which is over $6 million, but with a goal of someday getting to 360 days of cash on hand, which is over $12 million. So that gives you just some kind of perspective. None of these go to that 360-day level, and that's fine, but you can see the various ranges of days of cash on hand.
Would you explain that again so the general public understands what cash on hand means and why we feel it's so important?
No, thank you, and I appreciate that. And I'm trying to slow down. I realize I get all excited, and you get an accountant and start talking numbers, and it's, I hate to admit what a nerd I am. Okay. Approximate days of cash on hand is you take the operating expenses of the entity, and then you find out what it costs to operate the entity per day, and then you multiply that out by the number of days that you want. So basically you're looking at, if you want 180 days, you want 6 months of operating capital on hand in case of an emergency. And this is also to help even out any revenue fluctuations. And we've already proven that we know that projections are projections. None of them are exact and none of them are perfect. It would be wonderful if I could say, you know what, when we present that budget, those numbers are right on tact, but they're not, and they're going to change throughout the year because life changes, various circumstances change. What it is just like you would have at home, hopefully, you would have some cash in your account so that if something were to happen, or if maybe your revenue changed, maybe something happened, you would have enough cash to ride that out without having to go to rates and to affect the water users in a very brief manner. The more cash you have on hand allows you to be more proactive rather than reactive. That's really, I think, a critical component. When you don't have anything on hand, you're going to have to react to anything, any fluctuation. If you have a little cushion, you're going to have more flexibility to be proactive. The more cushion you have, the more ability you have to be proactive, regardless of what comes down the road.
What about the bond market? If we have, say, 300 days of cash on hand, does that have an impact when we send these to the bond market?
When you go before the bond market and you go, and initially when you go to the bond raters, which is going to happen later this week, what they want to know is that they can give you a good rating. They want to know, and what the bond market wants to know is that you have the ability to pay for these bonds. And that even if something happens, something fluctuates, and they're going to look at 5 years of data, they're going to look at your certified audit reports, and so that days of cash on hand is beneficial. If you don't have any, you're going to pay a higher rate, and they may not want your bonds. The more cushion you have, the lower the rate might be because it proves that you can pay those bonds back if something were to happen. It's a reserve.
Thank you.
I have one question. I don't know if it's for you or if it's for Laura Lewis, but
okay.
Looking at option 1 and looking at option 5, does it change anything if the cash on hand is the same?
Pardon?
So there's option 1.
Yes.
Days of cash on hand. And then option 5, the days of cash on hand goes up quite a bit. I guess my question is, why is that one higher, and does it change anything if it's lower?
Yeah, can you want to come up and...
I'm going to restate your question and see if I've got it. So your question is, under option 5, which has a longer bond than option, which one were you comparing it to?
Option 1, so 5 is shorter.
Okay. So option 1 is a 30-year.
Option 5 is 25 years.
Because your debt service payment, so let me think about this. So your debt service payment, and I didn't prepare this table, so I'm sorry, I have to think about this for a moment. So your debt service payment is lower. You would expect that your days of cash on hand would be a little bit higher. Oh, the issuance costs are lower on the bottom one.
I apologize, and I didn't mean to throw Laura to the wolves, but I know she knows all of this much better than I do. But just in reviewing this table, just from assuming what I can see, is your maximum approximate issuance costs are $10,000 higher in your option 5, and I would assume that that gives you just enough cash to increase those days by a few days there. And there could be some other things because your debt service payment is lower in option 1. And what I'd like to do is go and clarify those. I think they should be a little tighter than that.
Your interest is going to be lower
in option 5.
Yeah, and if we're using that 4.1, I mean, that's why.
And so your interest, that is going to be your.
It doesn't make sense to give them all the same number in this table.
I think I can address that for you in quantitative terms. So while you've been having this discussion, I pulled up today's MMD. It's the municipal market data. It's I mean, if someone can plug me in live, so there's the lovely thing of what it looks like. So it's a bunch of different interest rates based on a rating of a bond and its maturity. So quickly, I looked at the difference, and as Laurie indicated, a bond on its whole will have a different interest rate by maturity. So if you put yourself in an investor's shoes for a minute, and say, okay, Amy you want to be my conservative investor or my aggressive investor?
I don't want to buy your bonds.
Okay. Amy's not going to be. So she's really conservative or something.
I'm not buying your bonds.
So if I've got a conservative investor in Susie, and I've got an aggressive investor in Bart, the conservative investor may only want to go out and buy a bond that matures in 3 years. And Bart's planning for his kids' college, and maybe it's further away, and you want to buy a bond that matures in 15 years. Well, if I'm selling those bonds, and you find out that yours doesn't mature for 15 years and hers matures in 3, and you're earning the same interest rate, you're going to say, wait a minute, that's not fair. I'm taking more risk. I'm going out longer. There's the effect of the yield curve, et cetera. So when we speak to an interest rate on your bonds, we refer to this, geeky acronym in my world called the TIC. It stands for the true interest cost. And it's a weighted average maturity of that interest with each of those principles. So the best way to think about it is when you went to college and you took a 5-hour credit course and got an A, that was 5 hours worth a 4-point right grade point if you got an A. And then you got a 3-hour class and you got a B, well, that's a 3-hour times the 3 points for a B. And to come up with your grade point average, they weight that. They give you more credit for the fact that you got an A in a 5-hour class than you did getting a B in a 3-hour class. So it's the same kind of thing. We multiply the principal amount that matures in each of those years at those different rates and against the principal in each of those and come up with this true interest cost. And so when we refer to a rate of 4.1, we're assuming that that's the true interest cost. And Amy is accurate that a 30-year bond is going to have a different true interest cost than a 20-year bond. So with the magic of my handy-dandy HP calculator and Looking at the MMD today, I don't have the benefit of our quantitative software here, which is called Munix, to run the detail of the numbers. So, but I've been in this industry a long time. I can, look at sort of, okay, what they refer to as the weighted average maturity of all those bonds. So if we look at the fact that, on a $10 million bond issue, you're going to have, just like with the mortgage payment, you're going to have more principal that you pay out long and more and less principal you pay up short because your interest payment is higher. Same kind of thing. So there's this another term of art called the weighted average maturity, or the WAM. You'll know more, little acronyms for my business than you ever wanted to know. So the WAM is the weighting of that, and that will change as you lengthen or shorten the life of those bonds. So to be very conservative, I've looked at MMD, and instead of trying to guess what the weighted average maturity might be, even though I have a rough feel for that on a level debt service for a 20-year versus a 30-year bond, we can, sort of quickly look at kind of the worst case, because it will be something different than this because of the whole weighted average thing that I've explained. So if we look at a AA rated credit, and these are for GO bonds, so I would expect the city's water bonds to not price right on top of this scale. But just to give you the delta, a AA rated credit that would mature in 20 years would have a rate of 4.42 on the MMD as of today. Let me scroll down to get the 30-year. The 30-year would be a 4.70. So we've got 4.42, enter, 4.7 minus. So that's 28 basis points, or about a little over 1/4% of interest on the transaction. So if I look at $13 million in bonds, just using nice round numbers here, and 0.0028, that's about $36,000 a year. We'll put that in as the payment over 30 years. At a rate of about 4.3, which is what I think you'll be at. Let's hold on, 4.3i. Drum roll. So the difference of changing that 4.1 to a 4 plus 0.28 basis points, which is, again, I think being conservative here because we'll end up with a little bit different weighted average maturity than just the difference between a 20 and a 30-year, is about $600,000. So what's shown up there to me that is critical is that we're showing, again, assuming in this chart that everything's at a 4.1, that the relative difference between your best and worst case scenarios that are up there of a 20-year, your total cost of principal and interest on option 4 is $17 million. And that's a 20-year, and I've just figured out the difference between that and a 30-year that's not at 4.1 if we had used the higher interest rate of 28 basis points, that it's 24 million and change. So nice round numbers. We've shown you that the difference there is $7 million. What I would say, based on my quick and reasonable math, is that difference is probably $7.6 million. So there is a difference, but I don't know that it is. You'll have to decide what that order of magnitude means to you. It's not like it's a difference of an additional $6 million. It's an additional approximately $500,000, kind of give or take. So if that helps to frame your argument in terms of, which one of these looks better or worse to you, there's some additional numbers for you.
At our last session.
Are there other questions while I'm here?
So back to my question, can you explain why the days of cash on hand is different?
To be honest with you, I cannot. I did not, I have to plead a little bit of ignorance if I did not put this chart together. I will tell you that in my mind, your days of cash on hand should be bigger when you have lower debt service payments. And that's a little counterintuitive to that to me. So my best answer is I'm sorry, I don't know, and I'd have to dig into these numbers more.
So the last session that you were here, you mentioned that 30-year bonds were more difficult to sell than say, a lower number of years. Is that true?
You know, where the market's really struggling right now is in what we refer to as the belly of the deal. And we see that across taxables and tax exempts. So if we were with this deal in the market today, I think where we would be challenged in finding buyers, and again, I'm not the one that does that, we'll hire an underwriter to do that. Where they will be challenged in finding buyers is in the 25-year range. I think the long buyers, the 30-year buyers are there. I'm not saying that's not a reason to not shorten it up, but it's sort of the belly of the deal, anywhere from sort of the 15 to 25 that people are sort of struggling with. And we'll find buyers, but that's where we see less orders coming in than in some of the other maturities.
How does that affect the interest rate?
Your interest rate will be, again, based on just my quick and dirty, at least, about 28 basis points less if you were to shorten up from 30 years to 20 years.
Harder to find a buyer for the bond.
There's going to be those maturities there, whether I go 20 years or 30 years. And I'm still pondering your question. And if I think of it, I'm going to spring.
So let me ask it, sorry to harp on this, let me ask it a different way. If in option 5, the days of cash on hand were more similar to option 1, where it was 250 to 275, how would it change the rest of the equation? It wouldn't change it? Okay.
I mean,
that's my bottom question.
I mean, honestly, I look at the difference between 200 and 250 to 275, 300 to 240. I'm still a little bit in a quandary about the way this is being shown. So if I look at the lows and the highs and compare each of them in those two options, you're talking about a difference of 240 days cash on hand, that's the low in that one, to 250 days cash on hand as the low, in option 1. So we're talking about a difference of 10 days cash on hand. And on the high end in each of them, 275 to 300, that's another 25 days cash on hand. So somewhere between 10 and 25 days cash on hand is how those are going to differ. In Lara Land, that's not going to make or break the difference between a rating. Now the difference between 100 days and 200 days is going to matter to the rating agencies a lot more. So
okay.
I kind of look at that and say it's a little bit nominal.
Okay, that's all I needed to know. Thank you.
But I think we do need to get an answer to the question as to why those numbers, if they don't make sense, are they right? Are the assumptions in that table right?
It's a typo, and that would make sense to me. Mark just mentioned, and then suddenly everything makes sense to me. If the 300 is a 200, if that's a typo, then it makes sense to me. But again, I'll have to check that. I can get on my laptop and try to communicate with the people I need to do that.
But if it is a 200, then it still doesn't make much of a difference?
No, I think as I've presented to you in previous meetings, I don't, of any of these options, I don't really think there's a true right and a wrong. It matters what you want to, if it were that crystal cut and I was thinking you were just marching down the wrong path with any of these, I would certainly tell you. I think it does matter from how you want to see the water fund manage. And we all know that it has not, long-term historically. I don't mean like last year historically. Long-term historically, it hasn't been managed so that you could make improvements on a pay-as-you-go. It was managed as a, duct tape and Band-Aids, and let's see how long we can eke it out. So if I thought you were leading to a path that was going to do that again, I will be the first one to stand up and say, our infrastructure nationwide is crumbling. Don't be a part of that. You've taken so many steps in the right direction, and encourage you to continue to taking those right steps. Now, it's, the better is to have more cash on hand better is to have, so that you can, see what life looks like when you get your CFP updated related to your pipes. And beyond that, I can't speak to that at all. So, as Mark indicated, there's always more needs than there will be cash. And, you just have to, your job, your Solomon-like job is to try to find that balance. If you were going to try to shorten this up to 5 years, I'd probably be going, or to take it out to 40, which you could do under state law. I mean, either of those extremes would worry me. You're kind of talking, most of these are sort of in the middle. And I don't think I think there's a preferable way for the reasons that have been stated, but I don't think it's worth, throwing anyone on a sword over one option versus the other. In this, I mean, again, if you're going 5 years or 40, yeah, I'd want to have a different dialogue, but.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I apologize, I can double check that number on option 5 to make sure if that's a typo or not. I didn't have that information with me in my book, in my bag, but I could certainly check on that if that were a critical component, although I know that you need to think about this tonight, so apologize for that.
Mr. Chair, Janine just went to get the original documents so that we can compare those. So you may want to go on to your
forward with the public hearing. Okay.
With comments, and we can clarify.
Okay. Okay. This is a public hearing, so we will now accept public input. This is the public input, public hearing for the sewer and water bonds.
I want to know why we need to get another bond. Why wasn't it presented the first time at the right amount that they needed to borrow? Why do we have to keep on going back? We're already in debt as a city. Why do we need to keep on adding to the debt? We should be paying off our debts. And it seems like every time I turn around, we're getting a school bond, we're getting a library bond, now we're getting another city bond. They should have had their act together in the first place. Listening to them talk up here, it sounds to me like the city department and the water part, it doesn't have their act together. It doesn't have it planned right. And maybe as city councilman, maybe you need to start taking a look at, hey, why aren't they getting their act together? Why aren't they getting this stuff done? Why are they wanting to put more money into a system that's broke? Why can't we fix the problem, get it fixed right the first time? Why do we have to keep on coming back to this bond situation? I'm getting tired of hearing, oh, we need more money, we need more money. It should have been fixed the first time. When you come to the present it with the problem, with the right amount. I don't want to hear that you have $800,000 sitting in an account onto the side, not being spent to fix the water problem, yet you're asking for more money. Fix the damn water problem and use the money you've got.
Thank you. Will you state your name for the record?
Brandon Wapnick.
Thank you.
Thank you.
James Humphreys. I live at 2849 Polk Avenue here in Ogden. I've been following this the last several years and have not commented heavily on it. I've spoken to some of you personally, but with the help of Janine and a few others, I went through the CIP fund and the master plan that was adopted by the council a few years ago over the last few days. I'm looking for fiscal year 2014 over the next 5 years at $50 million in projects that you have already approved to be prioritized and reviewed. And even with $28 million in a bond, it's not enough money, and you won't earn enough money in 5 years to pay for all these projects in the first place. So that being the case, I think what we're looking at makes a lot of sense. Either way, we're bonding now or we're bonding in 2 years. It doesn't matter which council does it, it's going to have to happen. We're not going to raise the $100 million in the master plan to pay for all the repairs that have been ignored for 50 years in the city in the first place. And debt service ratio is going to exist now or then, so we're bickering over a few $100,000. Not to be harsh, but the city has no long-term unified master plan. We don't have a long-term planner. We don't have neighborhood plans that take into account all the zoning changes that you've made in the last 3 years that radically change estimations that were sent to the state for max build-out and so forth. We have much more significant issues on our plate to deal with. I hope the council won't dicker over a few $100,000 from this year to next year when we'll have to do it either way, and interest rates may or may not be higher or lower. The trend is up, as we all know from 6 months ago already, over the last 4 years. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, James.
Hello. Can I just ask, will there be a separate hearing on the storm drain bond, or is it one hearing for both?
Separate?
Separate, yes, they'll be separate.
2 separate hearings? So I'll confine my comments to the water bond for now. As you know, my name is Dan Schroeder, and I live at 1444 Binford Street. You may remember that a little over a year ago, about 15 months ago, I stood here and made a prediction. I predicted that the water rate increase you were approving would end up raising approximately $1 million more revenue than your consultants were estimating. And I want to stand here now and confess that I was wrong. In fact, your revenue for fiscal 2013 was only $700,000 more than the consultants predicted it would be. And to be fully honest, I'm going to tell you something else. My prediction was for an average watering year, and we didn't have an average watering year. We had a very dry year. In an average watering year, I think it would have come out only about $300,000 more than the consultants were predicting. I won't take the time to go into the reasons why I was partly wrong and they were partly wrong, and the answer was actually somewhere in between. There's good news, though. I also predicted that your operating expenses for the water fund would be considerably lower than were being predicted in the financial plan and in your budgets, and the budgets that Ms. Johnson is basing her projections on even now. It turns out, if you look at the data, we now have data from fiscal 2012 and fiscal 2013, your operating expenses have been more than $1 million less than the budgets and the projections have called for, and that's great news. I'd actually like to congratulate Mr. Lauder, Mr. Moffett, and all the employees who work under them for keeping operating expenses reasonable. Operating expenses are under control. It's actually about $10.5 million per year. It's not $12 million per year. You need to look at the actuals, not the budgets that are based on old data. Now, when we take that into account, it turns out that the fund balance now stands at $4.2 million above where your consultants had projected it would be only 15 months ago. In other words, 15 months ago, they projected that you would have $4.2 million less now than you actually have. And then now we hear there's another $1.2 million in interest from the 2008 bonds, so it's actually $5.4 million, I guess, more than we thought. That's great news, and actually that if you look at the current balance now, $10.2 million, that's almost exactly equal to 1 year of actual operating expenses. If you divide by the actual expenses, not the budgeted amounts, the water fund already has pretty much a full year of cash on hand right now, and that number is going to keep increasing at a rate of at least $3 million a year if you don't start spending that cash now. The emergency expenditure for the water line at the mouth of Ogden Canyon will cut 1.4 into that, but you need to spend more cash than that if you don't want your cash on hand to go above 360 days. Okay, so you need to start spending cash now unless you want those balances to go even higher. Okay, and I'll stop there and
thank you, Dan.
Come back later.
Thank you, Dan.
So it's 3 minutes, right? I'll try to keep track of that myself.
Okay.
I'm David Smith. You know, I appreciate the work of people like Dan Schroeder, looking at the actual numbers that we have here. My take on it is that you on the City Council have jacked our water rates so high that we have such a flush amount of money that we could literally fix our water treatment plant without any additional money. That's how much money we have now because of the rate increases that you've already put through. And still there's another rate increase to come through. You know, we have a stunning fund balance that Dan Schroeder has documented. This city is practically awash in money, whether it's 6 months or 12 months of operating expenses. We had our consultants say, well, you want to have a little cushion. Well, how many of you have an entire year's family budget saved so that if you made absolutely no other money, you'd be just fine? That's the kind of money they're talking about having as a cushion. 6 to 12 months of cushion seems completely ridiculous. Another thing that bothered me is there's been talk here about how we have an opportunity to bond here, and so by golly, let's take every opportunity we can to get as much money as we can, because the bond ferry will be leaving Ogden after this week. Do you remember a time in your entire life when Ogden City wasn't able to bond? Ogden City can bond any day of the week it wants and always has been, will be able to next year and the year after that. And I was frustrated by the comments I've heard about, well, we need to bond now because interest rates are going up. If there's anybody in this room that knows what interest rates are going to be a year from now, they will be very wealthy very fast. Nobody knows what interest rates are going to do. In fact, interest rates have been falling for 30 years in the United States. And so when people pick and choose the time frames to say interest rates are going up, they've been going down for 30 years. So that's another trend line. Another thing that was a little frustrating is we've got not a city water guy making the pitch tonight, but the city lawyer. I found that a little frustrating, and it seemed like he said, well, on the one hand there's this, and on the one hand there's that, but every one of his arguments came down to more money. The bottom line is you've jacked rates to the moon already. They're already some of the highest in Utah. You're awash in money. The city staff and their advisors say, more, give us more. We got to have more money. We got to have it now. There's only one reason for any of this, and that's so when I turn on the tap, I get water, and I get sewer on the other end. None of the rest of this matters for anything. These consultants and all these other arguments, I just ask that you look at what's really needed to keep us in water. And my sense is there's plenty of money right now. And so I would ask that you either reduce the bond or put it aside for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jim, Mr. Larkin, right now we're talking about the water bond. Is that what you want to talk about?
No, just public comment. No,
okay, not there yet.
It's a public hearing. Yep. Yeah.
Thank you. I just didn't want you to get up there and start and.
My name is Lori Schlichting, and I live at 621 Ogden Canyon. So while I don't pay property taxes, I do pay double in water to probably make up for the offset in property taxes. I can't vote for any of you because I don't live in your city, but you are my water provider. And I speak today on behalf of a group of concerned Canyon residents. We respect your time. So instead of parading Canyon resident after Canyon resident up here to ask you to please issue the bond, we're just here to remind you that the end-all be-all promise for Ogden Canyon residents for us to have safe drinking water at a reasonable pressure is the rehabilitation of the filter plant. And without that, I don't know where we'll be, but we won't be safe and we won't be up to state standards.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If there are no further comments, I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll second it.
We have a motion to close the public hearing by Councilmember Gochner and a second from Councilmember Van Hoosier. This is a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any further discussion or? It looks like Laura Lewis has.
I've been going over the data that we provided to the city, and whether or not my staff reviewed what was prepared here or not, I don't know. Wow, I rarely am asked to talk louder. I'll tell my children. So a couple of observations. The information that we prepared only looked at a 10-year time horizon. So it won't show sort of the long-term effects of the difference of the cash reserve on if you just issued a 20-year versus 30-year, because after the 20-year debt is paid off, you would be able to build up more reserves for those last 10 years. Okay, so the information that we provided was a 10-year time horizon, because that's what was looked at when we looked at the financial sustainability plan for your water and sewer system. In looking at that detail, so I'm not trying to show you was on the spreadsheet. I'm trying to look at what's on here. And it's, again, probably in the world of not a nominal difference, but we're showing for the scenario with 30-year debt, option 1, that you would end up in 10 years, that you would have 198 days of cash on hand. And in the 20-year scenario, you would have 203. So again, it's very nominal. Where that's really going to come to play is if you looked out, at a 30-year cash projection where you've only got 20 years of debt, then you would have all that more cash because you wouldn't be paying debt. So that's where it's really you're going to start seeing that come to life, if you will. That helped?
Yes, thank you.
We want to have someone get up and address any of the comments made.
I think they're all pretty fair comments. I will say, and I didn't catch the name of the first gentleman who spoke about the concept that I understand the sentiment that voters were asked to approve 2 bonds in the last election, and it seems like there are lots of bonds being issued. But it was a conscious decision in 2008 not to issue bonds for everything, for a couple of reasons. Partially because the number of projects was so massive that to get them done was going to take time, and also because at that time the City Council would have had to have increased rates to cover the debt payment on a bond of $70 or $80 or $90 million, because quite honestly at that time the projections, they hadn't done any full-scale engineering or anything. Projections for the filter plant and the Canyon water line were in the $40 million range. Now, when you look at those combined projects, it's half that, it's $20 million. So it might seem like it's a proliferation of bond, but quite honestly, this bond is part of a process that was planned out and anticipated. And as much as it might be frustrating to be talking about doing more bonds and more debt, it wasn't for lack of analyzing the situation and trying to come up with the best system that allowed projects to get done in an order that made sense and in a way that was financially responsible. As far as how you vote on which option, obviously that's your choice. Other comments I think are all pretty fair. I don't know that there's any real response one way or another to those, unless you have a specific thing you'd like clarified.
Maybe I can make just one comment, 2 comments. I don't remember the dollar amount of what our entire infrastructure system is estimated at. Does anybody have that number?
I think the rough number is usually about $500 million, $500 million.
And so I think, in fairness to the citizens, and I'm one of those citizens that's paying the increased rate, we're talking about a system that's been largely neglected for many, many years and is quite old. And we've got to be able to spend some money on what we know are huge problems under the ground. And so it seems like we're continuing to spend a lot of money, but we're not. Second comment that someone made, and I think it was valid, Mr. Stratford is one of our assistant city attorneys, but he's also considered to be one of the leading water attorneys in the state of Utah. And so because of his expertise in that area, we utilize it in the city, which I think is good. Third comment, I went to the rating companies back in 2008 with Laura and Mike Goodwin. And the rating companies told us that we hadn't instituted rate increases with enough time frame that we would even qualify to have done more of a bond than the 48 or 50 million or whatever we did at the time. But because our city had gone without rate increases in water for such a long period of time, they were real dubious about giving us a good rating or a good enough rating to be able to do the bonds back in 2008. And those just scratched the surface of a lot of the issues that we know we have under the ground. And it's hard for people to comprehend that because they don't ever see these pipes. It's kind of like when we were doing the Canyon Pipeline. The complaints went down a little bit when they started pulling the pipe out of the ground and people could drive by and see how bad the pipe was. 102-year-old pipe, it's never meant to last that long. And so I think if everyone could see what the water department sees and the sewer department sees and the storm sewer guys see on a daily basis when they're down there working on that infrastructure, they would understand why the administration's made the recommendation they've made. And you know, we've got a list of projects millions and millions of dollars long, and some of them we better get to pretty soon or we're not going to be able to deliver that water to the tap, and we're not going to be able to have the sewer work properly, and that's the problem that we're concerned about. When I was first a council member, Bill, back in 2002, we had a presentation from a study that was done around that time. I can't remember when that study was done. And they scared the living bejeebies out of me about the infrastructure needs that this city had when it came to water, sewer, and storm sewer. There was actually a director who lost his job because he was brave enough to come to the council and say, here's what you're facing. Here's what all of the studies that we've seen so far are saying about what the infrastructure's like. Older cities are struggling with this across the United States. I get publications all the time that talk about cities that are older. We were established before 1851, but that's when we were incorporated. We have old infrastructure, and we know we have really old infrastructure. And during the 80s and some of the 70s, there's not a lot of care that went into taking care of that infrastructure. So I don't know if that's probably longer than I should have, but I wanted to make sure that I addressed a couple of the things I heard specifically.
And I suppose the only other one in response to Mr. Smith is that, quite honestly, while the option would exist to bond at any point in time, as has been explained previously, and I didn't really feel like we needed to follow up on it, but just to clarify, that the treatment plant can't wait. The engineering divisions provided you the information about that. I personally talked with Scott Paxman from Weber Basin Conservancy District, and they had similar plants that were built at the same time, and he said, I can't imagine you didn't replace that 10 years ago, because they've replaced all of theirs. And so the delay there would be significantly negative for the city's welfare. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other further discussion?
I wanted to bring up a quote that's kind of interesting. This is from our May 15th, 2012 meeting. It's from Laura Lewis. And it says, if you're lucky enough to maybe collect a little bit more, please do not forget your capital facilities needs for your treatment plant are not going to go away. So that extra money can go toward that project. You'll have to bond less. So if you do collect an extra $1 million, well, you're not going to flush that down the toilet, no pun intended. You are going to set that aside into your capital facilities plan. When it comes time to actually construct that very much needed non-earthquake sound treatment plant, that money will go toward that and you'll be able to borrow less. That was from last year. And we are in that situation where we did collect more than we initially thought we would. So I just think that's an important point to remember, that, you know, these are taxpayer dollars that we're working with. We're charging people. We have some of the highest water rates in the area, and we are collecting money, and I think it's important to spend those dollars wisely. Now, do we spend those dollars on interest, or do we spend those dollars on projects. And I sent an email to everybody yesterday, and I didn't get any feedback from anyone on that, but voiced some concerns, and I don't know if anybody had any questions about that.
Let's see, I guess I want to look at this a little bit different way and kind of take it from a bird's eye view. Utah right now is recognized as one of the nation's most financially well-managed states in the country. And, you know, the state has established debt limits for local government. And if we approve the bonds before us today, Ogden will be under 55% of the allowable debt that's, you know, under the state laws. We have a city master plan, and these bonds are one of the tools which will give us the ability to continue upgrading our infrastructure. And I mean, this is not a surprise. We've been working on this since I have been on the council. And if there's no further discussion, I would make a motion. But I don't know if anyone else wants to comment.
I'd like to have some comments on the options, to see where we're at in those aspects there.
Are you proposing an option, or you?
I will go ahead and do that. This is for the sewer, I guess. Is this just for the water?
Yes.
For the water and
okay, so this is for the sewer and water revenue bond parameters resolution, option 5. I move that the council give direction to the pricing committee that the maximum interest rate, term, discount rate, and bond amount for sewer and water revenue bonds Series 2013 shall not exceed the cost of the water treatment facility, replacement of aging distribution pipes, installation of new water meters, and other related projects, which is approximately $13.4 million, plus all necessary and associated costs of issuance for a term not to exceed 25 years.
I'll second it.
We have a motion from Councilmember Gochner to adopt proposed resolution 2013-19, option 5, with the parameters of the cost of the water treatment facility, replacing the aging distribution pipes, installation of new water meters, and other related projects, which is approximately $13.4 million, plus all necessary and associated costs of issuance for a term not to exceed 25 years. And a second from Councilmember Van Hoosier. This is a roll call vote.
Councilmember Heyer?
Aye.
Councilmember Stevens?
Aye.
Councilmember Van Hoosier? Aye. Councilmember Wicks?
No.
Councilmember Gochner?
Aye.
Vice Chair Garner?
Aye.
Chair Blair?
Aye. That passes.
So I'll give the reason for my no vote. I would have supported a bond for the water treatment plant for 20 years. I think that that is something we need to address, and it would be difficult to come up with the cash to do that in the immediate future. It is a need, and am aware of that. The pipe replacement, those are long-term issues, and a flush of short-term money is not going to fix that problem overnight. You know, I'm not suggesting delaying any of the infrastructure projects in the financial plan. There is cash flowing into the water fund, and we should be able to address those with a timely schedule and invest our money in those projects instead of paying for interest over the next 20 years for that increased bond amount.
And I'm going to just add to Councilmember Wicks a little bit and touch on what Brandon said also. We feel strongly that we need to do these projects that have been mentioned. We need to not put them off, get them fixed. And part of this master plan, long term, we have another big issue that's going to be coming at us in the next few years, and that's replacing the 36-inch water line down Ogden Canyon. And we need to have, as Councilmember Wicks mentioned, the quote from 2012, as much cash on hand to decrease the amount of money we may need to, at that time, to possibly bond again. And so it's saying, you know, can we bond for all that now? We can't do that without really increasing our rates to our customers. And there are things that we have to be bold and deliberate in looking at, and I really feel like we're doing our best to look at these things and be very prudent. So thank you.
One of the things that I think is very important, and if you think we don't lose sleep over this, we do, because we're water-paying citizens too, and our water comes out of the same tap, and I think we all worry so much about what we're doing in government to protect our water supply. But I think passing this bond it's in the best interest of the citizens, and it provides us with a water system that will be sustainable and economical. And I think we've discussed this bond for almost 6 years since I've been on the council. I think we've put off the vote as long as we can, and like you, I agree with some of the bond issues that you've discussed, and we were hoping not to run up against that. And I think by providing this bond that we're doing now and sustaining and having money flowing in, we can take care of a lot of the needs that we wouldn't have to come back and ask for a bond again. And I just feel really that we've had professional analysis. We've looked at it from every angle. I think every one of us have just labored over this to make sure that we do make the right decision. And I just think it's imperative for us to protect our water supply and our infrastructure for our future generations. And that's what that means to me by passing this bond.
Just a few thoughts that I had as well. We did have so many years and decades where we got uncharacteristically low water rates, and we got to benefit from that, those of us who lived here at the time. I've lived here my whole life, and I guess I was in La La Land. I thought that's what water rates were supposed to be until they went up, and you know, you start to kind of look at what's really before us. Since being elected to the council, it has been quite an enlightenment and quite an education in what the state of our infrastructure really is. I live in the north end of town. I represent that end of town, and a few years ago we lost water for about 3 days due to poor infrastructure. And we didn't get to turn on the tap and get water. And we don't want that to happen ever again to any part of our community. I think if we had lowered this and throttled back, it would be just like the councils from 50 years ago that just kicked the can down the road further. Just by nature of, you know, we need to step up our infrastructure improvements, not throttle it back. And that's why I was in favor of this and voted for it. I think everyone that has mentioned this has been reasonable in their point of view. I don't think anybody's trying to do something bad for the city, but I think you know, we can differ on what we think is best. But this is that's why I voted the way I did.
I think this has been a very difficult decision for us to make, but it is one that we're looking toward not only the present but the future aspects of our system that we have. It was mentioned tonight that why didn't we fix it the first time? Well, we didn't have the funds to fix it the first time. We knew things would need to be repaired and taken care of and addressed, and one of the items was the filter plant up the canyon. And that's such a critical aspect. Our water's coming down that canyon, and anything can happen, and we need to find a system by which we can prevent the stoppage of our water coming into our area here. And the improvements of the water being delivered to the homes is very critical to us. And the opportunity of being able to have our city on meters that can actually go ahead and read actual gallons of water being used. And hopefully we can put that on our computer where we can equalize the payments across the board to all of our citizens. And that's a benefit to all of our citizens there. I'm very mindful of the indebtedness of the city, but also I'm reminded of the type of service that we need to provide to our citizens at an adequate cost. fiscal responsibility is paramount in all of our minds here on the council. And so we use the money as best adequate as we can. And I believe that what we've done here is not only address the problem of what is being presented to us, but it also presented a situation where we can improve for our future generations.
I would echo that of the council. This was something that was talked about at great lengths, not just the last week or month or year. This has been going on for a long time, and because it's so important, we took the time to really look at this. And water affects everyone. Everyone needs water. Everyone uses the water, and so we wanted to be as prudent as we could. And I believe we did do what's best for the city right now, and addresses the problems that are most facing right now, and there'll be other problems that come up, and we'll have to address those too. And hopefully with what we've done tonight, we can be able to attack those problems also in the future. If there's no further discussion, we'll move on to the storm sewer revenue bonds. Is it? No presentation on that?
We had a combined presentation
Okay.
because there wasn't a lot to talk about there, so we were just assuming you'd go straight to public comment.
We will go straight to public comment then. So this is also a public hearing, so we will accept public comment on the storm sewer revenue bonds. Just a reminder to state your name and address for the record.
Dan Schroeder, 1444 Binford Street. I'd like to question the wisdom of maintaining 365 days, actually it's more than that, of cash reserves in the sewer fund, either for sanitary sewer or storm sewer. If you look at your revenues for those funds, they're almost entirely fixed. Your storm sewer revenue is completely fixed. It doesn't depend on how much rain falls in a given year. It's just a flat rate that you slap on everyone based on the size of their impermeable surface area. So revenues are predictable. Expenses are also, I think, under control. You've already done a study of capacity issues, and you've seen that your capacity needs are all going to be addressed within about 5 years. There is this little uncertainty about what happens after that when you get the study on the condition of the system. But I would urge you not to make a decision today until you've actually seen that study, because if you aren't going to be facing major needs 5 years down the road on the condition of that system, then it would make much more sense to just borrow money for the very short term, because you're going to have cash flowing in very rapidly after 5 years once the capacity issues are addressed. So why don't you wait for that study of the condition issues of the storm sewer system, and then maybe it'll show that you need to bond for more than $5 million, or maybe it'll show that you don't need to bond for 20 years, that 5 or 10 years would be enough. But I don't understand why anyone would make a decision now when you've got a study in the works and the results of that will be in soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Seeing no movement, I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll second it.
We have a motion to close the public hearing from Councilmember Gochner and a second from Councilmember Van Hoosier. This is a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes. Sure, it's closed. Any other further comment?
If there's no further discussion, I'll go ahead and make a motion that we adopt Resolution 2013-20.
I'll second it.
We have a motion from Councilmember.
Sorry, Chair. We've actually already adopted the resolution. This is just direction to the pricing committee to do the action. So.
And I will change my motion to align with that.
So we have a motion from Councilmember Gochner to set the bond parameters. Is that?
I think you need to define them. So we've provided some language for you.
It's on the bottom of the page.
Oh, okay, sorry about that. Okay, I will make a motion. I move that the council give direction to the pricing committee that the maximum interest rate, term, discount rate, and bond amount for sewer and water revenue bond series 2013 shall not exceed $4.5 million, plus all necessary and associated costs of issuance for a term not to exceed 20 years.
And I will second that again.
We have a motion from Councilmember Wicks to from Councilmember Gochner to set the storm drain revenue bond parameters at the, let's see here, that the discount rate and bond amount for sewer and water revenue bonds 2013 shall not exceed $4.5 million, plus all necessary and associated cost of issuance for a term not to exceed 20 years. And a second from Councilmember Van Hoosier. This is a roll call vote.
Councilmember Stevens?
Aye.
Councilmember Van Hoosier?
Aye.
Councilmember Wicks?
No.
Councilmember Gochner?
Aye.
Councilmember Heyer?
Aye.
Vice Chair Garner?
Aye.
Chair Blair?
Aye. That passes.
I'll give the reason for my no vote. I think it's ridiculous to adopt this before we have the plan, and I think that we should consider a shorter bond term for that amount, given the amount of money flowing into that fund.
And I think Mr. Schroeder brings up some good points, and I think with the parameters that we've set, we haven't set what the bond will be, but I do think that it's very prudent of us to look at those, look at what actually is needed, and look at the cash on hand. And he mentioned that we have some very predictable revenue streams, and it's really important that we know the condition of the system. So I do think it's in our best interest to get that information as soon as we can, too.
So are we going to have this before it goes to the pricing committee?
We actually have, it outlines what projects are to be worked on.
What the projects are, but are we going to have a chance for discussion about this before it goes to the pricing committee? Or is there?
And Councilmember Gochner, thank you for reminding me of that. So I'll review that information again. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, tonight was your opportunity to have discussion. I guess would hope that if you need further discussion, the pricing committee would need direction tonight.
We just gave them direction, correct?
Yes, you did.
I seem to be the only one with concerns, so it probably doesn't matter.
Well, I think if we have the projects outlined and we know what we're doing with the money, it's not like we're just getting the money, it's going to sit there and then we're going to decide later what to do with it. And that's what that made it sound as if we were going to be doing. And I think we really have plans in place to how to use this money.
Plan, right?
Okay.
Haven't adopted.
The language was in what we adopted a couple weeks ago, and it is the stormwater system on Harrison. I'm not the engineer, but the stormwater on Harrison going down to Monroe.
Harrison down to the Ogden River. That's why I said
Right.
I stand corrected. Thank you.
Any other discussion? If not, then we'll move on to the reports from administration, and we have a budget opening.
If Brandon's still awake, he's going to make a presentation. We have a hard time keeping his attention during water discussions.
Been very educational. Good evening, and thank you for your time tonight. Thank you for your important decisions, and thank you for your work on behalf of those bonds. Before you now is Ordinance 2013-41, proposed Ordinance 2013-41, reappropriating $8,500 for public art in the Ogden City Terminal expansion project out at the Ogden City Airport. The city's Percent for Art ordinance provides a mechanism to fund public art through the allocation of 1% of project funds for each capital improvement project to art that's incorporated within the project. Art funds not used in the particular project are pooled and held for use in the acquisition or creation of other public art. In fiscal year 2012, you folks approved the capital improvement project out at the airport terminal expansion in the amount of $6 $150,000, of which 1% was derived, $6,500, and was allocated for public art to be incorporated into the project. The public art that's being proposed and incorporated into the project requires an investment of $15,000, which means an additional amount of $8,500 is needed. This proposed art was presented to the Planning Commission on June 5th and was given a recommendation for approval, as well as presented to the City Council on August 6th for review and comment. So based on that review and those comments, it's requested this evening that you approve Ordinance 2013-41, reappropriating the $8,500 in pooled art funds to be used in connection with the terminal expansion project. Any questions?
I have a question about the pooled funds. How big's that pool getting?
I believe the fund currently is $170,000 before any additional reappropriations from it.
And where these funds are coming out is the art fund, so that's why it's being used in this capacity here.
Correct. So
it's off of CIP projects. We have a 1%, and so that comes off these CIP projects. And if it's not used for that specific CIP project, then it goes into a pool of funds, and we need your authorization to be able to use it for a different project.
But it is a designated fund for art.
Correct. This
only
percent for art.
Only.
Brandon, is that there have been people at the airport that have complained about the condition of gates and any number of other things, and wondered why we're spending money on this thing when they could be spent on gates or whatever.
Right.
And I think it's important that this be understood that this percent for art is a state requirement, and that it can't be used for something else.
That's correct. When this was set up, this fund and this ordinance is only allowed to go towards our projects, either designated to the project.
It isn't actually a state ordinance, though it's a city ordinance.
It's a city ordinance.
But it is
ordinance.
Your point is right.
Yeah.
Is correct. It's meant to be connected with the project or with public art. Yep. Thank you.
It isn't just discretionary that we just decide willy-willy.
Some art at the airport.
Willy-nilly, yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Okay.
Okay, with that, I just move that we adopt proposed ordinance 2013-41 to reappropriate $8,500 for public art in the Ogden Airport Terminal Expansion Project.
And I'll second that.
We have a motion from Councilmember Van Hoosier to adopt proposed ordinance 2013-41 and a second from Vice Chair Garner. This is a roll call vote.
Councilmember Van Hoosier?
Aye.
Councilmember Wicks?
Aye.
Councilmember Gochner?
Aye.
Councilmember Heyer?
Aye.
Councilmember Stevens?
Aye.
Vice Chair Garner?
Aye.
Chair Blair?
Aye. That passes. Next is public comments. This is an opportunity to address the council regarding your concerns or ideas. Please state your name and address for the record and limit your comments to 3 minutes.
I'll go then. Apologize for the sound. It was on silent, but electronics. Okay, my name is Jim Larkin. I live at 3038 Polk Avenue. I addressed you last month regarding our issue with the Mount Ogden Senior Housing Project here, basically on a follow-up. I had sent an email to all of you, so you'll have a little more detail because I knew we wouldn't have time to address that here tonight. But the key items that we as a neighborhood are still interested in addressing. Switch that, or you do your thing?
She'll take care of it.
Yeah, that's the key right there. Okay. So I appreciate your time and interest, particularly last time. A number of things have happened since then. This is a fairly time-critical issue because obviously the applicant and the contractor are finishing, well, the contractor in particular, finishing up and getting out as quickly as possible. And we as a city, neighborhood, and neighbors will be left to deal with what they leave behind for a very long time. We have a number of concerns, particularly the trees were one of the issues. We're still interested in knowing the real root cause, and I'll quit playing on that pun. That's a technical failure investigation term. I've sent you some more information via email on that. The bottom line is the root cause is something that you can control and that you identify that says if this had not happened, then the bad thing wouldn't have happened. Okay. I won't go into further elaboration on that, but up until now, it's a given that the root balls were destroyed prior to our urban foresters getting there. It's a given that when he was there, the only choice was to have them removed. What we haven't no one's been talking about or has said is why were the root balls destroyed? As far as I'm concerned, I only see three choices. It was either willful, negligent, or incompetent. I don't know what else there is. So we'll be interested in finding if someone ever says what the root cause is. But one of the things that the council had addressed was we don't want this to happen again. One of the items, if you're going to prevent something from happening again, you have to know why it happened the first time. Okay? And so far, that hasn't been put on the table. So that was the issue. They're currently also, again, in willful violation of their conditional use permit. In case anyone's not aware, was at the Planning Commission and made a presentation there. This one is, I'd say it's as obvious, it's just not as severe to correct, in that it was they were approved, the Planning Commission approved the amended plans. However, they were very specific. The contractor had built an enormous monument sign, 8 by 10 or something. The Planning Commission said, no, that was never approved. They had them cut it down. They were very specific in their approval that it should be non-illuminated. If any of you want to drive by there this evening, you'll see it is very illuminated. Why? I don't know. Okay, I'd have to ask them. That was the thing, significant problems. We're concerned about other problems with the project that were not, once you have obvious problems with a project, you certainly wonder, what are the not obvious problems? They do have an issue with their drainage. They have standing water.
Thank you.
Nope, I got 20 seconds. Okay, but if you got the master clock, I'll wrap it up. Okay, so those are the key things you would take a look at that. We are very interested in your responses, okay? Because what we've seen is a complete disrespect of the neighborhood, the city, by the contractor.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Larkin.
Thank you very much. We'll make one passing comment on water. There's an old cowboy expression in the West, you don't mess with a man's whiskey, his woman, or his water, and especially his water. So.
Yep.
Members of the council, I'm Don Frederickson. I live at 3026 Polk Avenue, right directly south across the street from this project. I think Jim probably said most of what you needed to hear, except I'll reiterate a little bit on the poorly managed project. We lived with dust, mud, and no shake-off area where the trucks come off the, off the project. And that's a part of the requirements. Any development in Ogden has to have shake-off areas. It was a river of mud for a while. And when the neighbors complained, the contractor brought in gravel. But in the wintertime, right after, the trucks just sunk down. And so they stayed off the property and did all their work on the street, which made it even worse. That being said, that's kind of under the carpet now, but in Planning Commission last, we talked about a number of things that I think could have been solved by proper planning and professional planning, especially in landscape and civil engineering. It would probably eliminate all the problems that occurred there. And so with that, again, is under the carpet, but we did ask for concern on a monument sign, which I think they've addressed, and was not supposed to be lit. And we ask that the developer and the council would eliminate the pole lights. There's 2 large pole lights on site that not only light up the small parking lot and the area in front of the building, but they light up the whole neighborhood. And I think that's a public nuisance. And if any of you want to, you're welcome to come over and sit on my patio at night. I'll furnish the pretzels and beer, and you can take a look at these lights that shine in your eyes all night long. There's no timer on them. They never shut off. And anyway, I think that we should ask or tell the developer, shame on you, and I think the planner should be told the same. You do have a wonderful bunch of city planners, and I respect all of them. I know them for a long time. I don't think they would ever let this happen if it wasn't for the developer maybe sneaking it through, as maybe bad terminology, but it's really a poorly done job. It's a beautiful building, but it doesn't fit in the area. It's way out of scale, and that's my comments. Appreciate you listening to me.
Thank you. Christine, do you want to come over to the mic?
Sorry. 3038
Pull
Polk.
that down.
Pardon?
You can pull that down. Oh, there you go.
3038 Polk, Christine Larkin. I'm the photographer of the family. The gentleman that just spoke, I wanted to show you from his, that's what he sees from his backyard where he used to see the mountains. That's what he has, absolutely no privacy at all. Looking up the street, this is what we used to see. Is that all in there? Is that all?
We'll help you.
That's what we used to look at every day. This is what we're looking at every day now. There's a gentleman that's living kitty corner from this complex that's trying to sell his house. He's not having very much luck because this is now what he sees every day. That's during the day. And I'm not a night photographer. That's the best I could do, but that's what he sees at night, every night. Thank you.
Thank you.
One more time, Dan Schroeder, 1444 Binford Street. Hey, I go by that new development every day myself. I don't live real close to it, but I do pedal by it every day. And I guess I just have one suggestion, and if someone could ask that those lights be put on motion detectors so that the lights aren't on all night, I think that would be a big help. I do appreciate that they have put in some trees, and it's looking a little better than it did a couple weeks ago. As far as the bonding goes, I, and I hope you, will be watching those cash balances in the coming year and 2 years and 3 years. If those cash balances continue to go up, then someone has broken a promise, someone has broken the public trust. You need to start spending that cash. If you're really afraid that these leaky pipes are such a problem and we need to start replacing them, then let's get those capital improvement projects approved and let's start spending that cash. It is not it's not responsible for the city to keep letting cash accumulate more and more and more. So we'll be watching, come back in a year or two, and we'll see where those cash balances stand. I hope you will pay them down to about 180 days, and that's for all three funds. You don't need any more than that.
Thank you.
Again, James Humphreys at 2849 Polk Avenue. And like others, I walk past that project every day, and it is definitely at least one story out of scale for our neighborhood. It's too large, it has too many people, the parking lot's too much, ripping out all those beautiful old mature trees before they were required because the developer got a little fast-paced on his destruction of the property has caused that street to be very, very exposed. And it will be 20 years before it is not exposed again. And it was a sore mistake that I hope the council in the future will be a little bit more mindful of. On the bonding, I'm glad to see we're making major improvements. You know, there are $100 million of work. You addressed $18 million of them tonight, and you have 10 years to figure out how you're going to deal with the rest. But I also agree with Dan. We do have money sitting in the bank. We need to have an appropriate reserve. At the same time, I'm incredibly disappointed that the money sitting in reserve is earning less than the rate of inflation. So it's becoming worth less money every day, and it will have less buying power a year from now if it is not spent or reasonably managed based on state statute. Whatever the consequences are for us to make that improved, whether it's a petition to the legislature for adjustment in how we can invest those, whatever the situation is, we need to find a way to manage that. I'm sure people at the city are doing what they can, but earning less than the rate of inflation is unacceptable for any slush fund in the millions of dollars in any institution in this country. And I hope that is something that we will look at fixing as quickly as we can.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Dave Dice, 3051 Taylor, and a new subject, the wonderful Mount Ogden Park. And I've been lucky enough to have the eyes and ears of Council Chair Blair that I've sent photographs to. Sunday, soccer day, there's probably more beer in that park than it goes through brewskis. On Tuesday, when they cut the grass, there's 3 to 5 city employees that walk through with 5-gallon buckets and pick up straws, towels, lids, pop tops, socks, you name it, it's there in the park. We need to have parking control on the west side of Taylor. It's in there, the signs are up. Nobody patrols Saturday or Sunday. There seems to be no management, no control, no oversight on Mount Ogden Park. And it keeps going downhill, not uphill. There's no grade on it. We have garbage that sits and it blows around, and every time we get a wind, it comes all the way up and down Taylor Avenue. The special events, it seems like whenever they happen, it's just a disaster. After this last run, I picked up more than 30 little orange signs that were put all over the park by the operator of the run. Nobody picked them up. They were there when they moved out after their 18-hour run. The place was a joke. There was more trash than you could have filled 5 30-gallon garbage bags with. No oversight, nobody checking it. On Sunday, there's an Ogden City cop that sits up there in his car. He gets out and walks around. They put the beer away. As soon as he goes back to his car, they drink the beer. I've sent photographs 4, 5, 6 months to Mr. Blair of garbage cans full of beer. Nothing is done. It's not getting any better. They don't pay for the service of the park. There's nothing collected by the city. It's all money going out the door, nothing coming back in. I've been back here in Ogden after 44 years in California. In California, you use a park, you pay for it. In Ogden, you use the park, you get your money back after a simple little deposit, and you leave it as a trash can, and there's no blame, and there's no recourse to the people who use the park. And if you live there, and you come up and visit, and I've told Chair Blair, I've invited everybody, come up. I'll serve you far better ice cream, because that's my family. And you can sit there and you can listen to the language, watch the beer, watch the parking abuse on Sundays and on every afternoon of the week. Yesterday, after soccer practice on Monday, I picked up 30 water bottles left by soccer camps. The park needs control, it needs direction, it needs guidance, and it needs an operational program that keeps it a premier park instead of a dumping zone for the city of Ogden. There's my 3 minutes, and I could talk for 30 more. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah. Seeing no other public comments, we'll move on to comments from mayor or administration.
Since Mr. Montgomery put a tie on, I'm going to give him some of my time, if that would be okay with you, Chair, to respond a little bit to the issue that was brought up on Mount Ogden Senior Housing. Thank you. I wasn't sure, remember what the rest of the title was.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. And just to address the things that Mr. Larkin and some of the other neighbors have talked about, I mean, we've been in discussion. That is not staying still, is it? I'll back up this way then. It's not going to stand up. You know, we understand the concerns of what has taken place in the neighborhood, because when you have mature trees and you've lived in that neighborhood and you've set a tone and a character, and what has taken place, it alters everything. It really does. And I think the thing that's hardest is when this is man-made. If you have trees that age and die, you kind of understand what takes place there, and then you have to start over again. But where they were cut and to such a point that then they had to be removed, that does create a concern. As we've tried to look at the scenario, and I guess answer a couple of points of, if you will, the root cause, and what have we learned from this? A couple of things we've learned from, I think, from this, and that we're taking into consideration for future projects, is first of all, when we know we've got a sensitive situation, we need to be proactive in setting the design solution to begin with, rather than relying on the engineers and architects of the developer to set the solution and us okay it. I think we need to be more proactive and say, this is how you will do it, not say, you give us a suggestion, then we'll say if it's okay or not. I think being proactive with those sensitive situations will put us up front, because it doesn't lead to then the misunderstanding and miscommunication of who's supposed to be doing what standards are set. They're set right up front, and the negotiation is done before any development even starts, rather than as time goes on, okay, now we'll come back and take a look at this, let's see where the next step is. I think that's the first thing we've learned from this. The second thing we've learned, I think, is one that the Planning Commission at the last meeting stated, was that they want to have an ordinance, a tree ordinance, in place. We're going to have a work session in mid-September to address that specifically will place more emphasis on site trees, on the public trees, and set better penalties and parameters. What happens if trees are taken down? Right now, they're considered, if it's a violation of the site, it's a $125 fine to begin with, and it doesn't do much. While these trees, in terms of value, I'm not aware of what the true value is. I do know a few years ago we dealt with an issue on 12th Street where we had a horse chestnut, and at that time we got a value of about $8,000 of what the value of the tree would be. And as we try to work with that, you know, the concern is here you've got an asset to a property that is more than just what does it do for that individual property, what does it do for the area. We don't know what the value of these trees were, but there's nothing we can do about where it is now. We can't glue them back and say, well, it's good as new. It doesn't work that way. So we try to make the development at least respond to what has happened by installing 6.5-inch caliper trees when the normal standard is 2 to replace what has taken place in the park strip. We also doubled the amount of trees on site since their first approved site plan to try again mitigate it. We've basically, with the urban forester, looked at every possible inch we could put trees in, realizing that as they grow, they still got to be able to survive. The conditional use permit that was then approved for the project, the revised conditional use permit, has now stipulated that not only do they have the year warranty on all the trees and all the plants, that if they die within the year, then they have to be replaced at the developer's cost, and we hold that warranty in place, that with the conditional use permit approval, that any time one of those trees dies, they have to be replaced or there'll be a violation of the conditional use permit. So we've gone above what a normal present ordinance is to stipulate that. The lighting on the sign, I'm going to drive up there tonight because, as was mentioned, there's not supposed to be any lighting on the sign. And as was explained at the Planning Commission meeting, the lighting needs to be done that it meets ordinance that the direct light source is not visible from off the property. And that condition applies, and if it's in violation, then we will go to correct that, whether the contractor leaves the site or not. That's still an owner's responsibility, and what he does with the contractor and between him, one of them have to solve it. We don't care who, they just have to solve it. So we'll be taking a look at that too. I know there's a concern that with the certificate of occupancy right now, that still has not been issued. There's a fire safety issue that still has to be addressed. In my discussion with the fire marshal, there's supposed to be an inspection on the 27th of August to see whether or not it will pass that. But until it passes the fire safety issues, no one is allowed to occupy the building. And no occupancy permit has been issued yet at this point.
Are you holding it at all because of the trees? Or the trees are just a
Well, the trees have all been installed according to the revised conditional use permit. So they've put in the 6.5-inch caliper trees in the park strip. They've added all the additional trees. So all the landscaping issues on the revised site plan have all been installed now.
The other question I'd have is the original plan had a rock, and now you've got a marquee. I don't know how.
So what the Planning Commission did is amended their sign to allow a 4-foot tall sign. The rock was 3.5 foot in height.
I know, but a rock's a rock and a marquee's a marquee.
Right.
And that's two different animals, in my opinion.
But the Planning Commission did approve the revision, so that is what is approved now, as a 4-foot rather than 8-foot tall sign. So if they have not reduced it down in size, and it's supposed to be a brick and a metal sign, as it was mentioned, without any lighting on it, then we'll have to follow through on that to see.
I've seen the sign. You know, I just am unhappy that it's a sign and not a rock, because I think that's certainly sets it apart in the neighborhood, that this is a commercial entity, really.
I'm trying to think if there's any other item that was brought up as far as where we're at and what we're trying to do with that. I think the comment about mass and scale, I think that is one of those issues as we look at our zoning ordinance in terms of the R4 zone, which is what that property is, versus the R1, which is what is across the street. I think it's made us also reflect on setting some parameters. Given the fact that the existing hospital was 400 foot long, and the properties across the street from it were single-family homes, that was some of the considerations as the Planning Commission looked at it, as far as that block and its development versus the perimeter block, and that you did have a hospital established there and a reuse of that area. True, on this side you had a convent, which is being used as an office in the last go-around. But it has made us stop to take a look of maybe setting some additional parameters in the zones based on, again, relationships that are more definable, so that to begin with, you know what you have to deal with, where it's vague and saying there is no standard in the R4 zone, it's just a conditional use. And again, when we received really no public comment at the original meeting about the building itself, again, the commission felt they were moving forward, but when the trees were taken down, then of course it revealed how massive the building was.
Well, and I think the building was manageable before the trees were removed.
Yeah, probably so.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have mattered.
You wouldn't have noticed so much. Now that's all you see.
But yeah, what's been done is done, and we can't bring the trees back other than just trying to create a mitigating plan. As far as could there be something more done in terms of mitigation, I really don't know what else could have been done as far as what is now approved in terms of mitigating impacts. The building is built, and the approval was that building could be built. And so to come back now and say, well, now you can't have the building there, we wouldn't win the lawsuit. We'd lose the lawsuit. As far as trying to mitigate it, then you try to say, what are the mitigating factors? Well, the only thing you can do is landscaping. And we've looked at the largest trees possible that could survive at this point and being transplanted, and increasing the number so that the future will be even thicker vegetation than what had existed or what was proposed in the original plan. So we felt that is the best compromise in mitigation that could take place.
And Mr. Montgomery, with that, I mean, as council members, we all felt terrible when we heard about this. But the mitigation and the correction to this really is the Planning Commission and your department.
Yeah. And like I said, I don't know what other mitigation could take place than what the Planning Commission approved that would solve any other problem, other than, again, light control, which the Commission addressed and will be looking at to make sure that's followed, the sign, the lighting on the sign, and make sure the trees are maintained and alive.
Sure. And, you know, as a council, when we first heard about this, we gave some direction, you know, going forward to have just some stricter oversight over this and to watch it and to do our best not to have this happen again. And so penalties and other things for these contractors going forward.
And I think that's why the Commission really is going to even go beyond that in terms of the tree ordinance and what they're going to be recommending to you in the next few months.
Yeah, when could we expect to see that?
My guess is you'll probably see that. If we're doing the work session in September, hopefully we could then have the public hearing in October, and you'll see it the middle or late October.
That's, you know, we've talked about that for lots of years.
Yeah.
You know, protecting the trees on sites, and, you know, that's probably as good a mitigation as we can have, is that we can learn from the mistakes, put some real penalties in place for developers that violate their conditional use, and so that it will keep them from violating them.
Well, and not just the conditional use. We'll look at this tree ordinance as all trees in the city that are substantial. You know, I'll go back to the old farmhouse on 12th. When they took it down, they took down a lot of trees, too, that shouldn't have been taken down. But we didn't have anything that said you couldn't do that.
Yeah, that's been a thing. Before people go in and get their permit, they take down all the trees so they can avoid any problem. And if we have a tree ordinance that addresses those kinds of issues, then that'll be really important.
Yeah.
So what tools do we have, say this coming spring, those trees don't send out leaves and they're dead, and they aren't replaced? What sort of recourse do we have?
Well, we'll hold the money for the first year warranty, so we'll have cash on hand to say, you know, you don't get your money back until you put the trees back in.
And you can revoke the conditional use permit.
Yeah, if you got to that point.
So that's the first year. Beyond that,
then it's the revocation of the conditional use permit, saying your plan is now tied to these many trees on site being alive at all times. If you're not maintaining that, you're in violation of the conditional use permit, then we do the hearing. And so at that point, you know, they've got an investment in there that the revocation would get their attention, that the cost of a tree versus losing the occupancy of the building would catch that attention.
We'd send code enforcement over there also.
you know, they had their sidewalk poured and plants in the ground before their revised plan went to the Planning Commission.
Yeah, they were, our discussion with them about that, you know, it may be premature because you don't know what's going to happen. They said, well, we want to show that we're at least trying to do something at this point. We said, we can't stop you from putting in the trees and that now, but just realize you may have to put in more if the Planning Commission requires that.
Well, I think to the neighbors, it looks as if they're kind of thumbing their nose at the process by going ahead and completing something that's just, a little bush compared to a tree. And I think that's offensive to me as a citizen. And as I sit back and look at my neighborhood, and if somebody came in and did it to mine, I can't tell you how offended I would be and angry with the developer. So I think, it's also an issue of feelings here, if you want to say so.
There is.
It certainly is. I mean, and the outlook that they can get away with it. And in this case, it's not happening, and I'm glad that it isn't. But to the general public that drives by there every day, they figure the developer won.
Well, and depending on what you expect as an exaction from an action, you still may feel that they won.
Yeah.
But they, the question is that they had to spend more money on the project from what they had budgeted to meet these additional requirements. They had to take some things out. If they haven't, they will. This in terms of the sign and that type of thing. I haven't been up to look at the sign, so I'm not. I'm going to go up tonight to see if it's lit.
But the issue is they're still going to be making money while these trees are growing for 20 years, and the neighbors are devastated. Yeah. And that's not, to me, a good compensation. But I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Greg, thank you for your help, and thanks for staying.
May I approach one more time on this?
No.
Mr. Dice, thank you.
The public comment's over.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Public rebuttal.
Yeah.
I would love to answer the questions that Mr. Larkin raised.
We'll get with you, Mr. Larkin.
I've already sent it to you in writing.
Chair, if it would be okay, if any of these individuals would like to talk to Mr. Montgomery afterwards, he'll be available.
I'm sure they would love to talk to Mr. Montgomery.
Don't delay him, though, till the sun rises, because he'll never get to see the sign at night.
Okay. Comments from council members?
Just one brief. For the mayor and the fire department, thank you for your efforts over this last 2 weeks. And, thanks our fire guys for all the hard work they're doing. And we hope this arsonist and other things stop quickly.
We have 3 squadrons of police officers working on this issue right now. So we're putting every resource we have into trying to locate who's doing this.
I have a question, just something that's been brought up. With the water restrictions from Pineview Secondary Water, are we going to be lenient with people having not so lush and green lawns? And could we maybe put something up on the website? People are wondering what in the heck they're supposed to do if they have to cut their water use by 50% and then they fear the city coming after them for that.
That's a great idea. We'll put something up on the website. We haven't been enforcing burnt lawns all year because we knew the water situation was.
So are we going to encourage Ogden City water users who are using culinary water on their landscape to start conserving? Are we concerned about that too?
We're talking about that, and we should have an answer for you soon, but that was some dialogue that we experienced. The other secondary water provider hasn't taken the same steps as Pineview has. So we're kind of weighing our options, and we'll be coming to you with probably what we've come up with, but we're not through the dialogue yet. We've just started having that dialogue today.
I think you need to get something out pretty quick because the water is running out of the reservoir.
And I think people are kind of wondering what they're supposed to do with scheduling their sprinkler timers and things like that. And they fear that the city's going to come after them. And I've told them, if you get a ticket, bring it to me. I'll deal with it. But if we're not enforcing, we should let people know that.
We're still enforcing weeds. We're still enforcing junk and debris. We are not enforcing burnt lawns.
Yeah, that's.
But we haven't all year. Code enforcement hasn't done that all year. So, and the house next to me is living proof of that.
So our water supply is a little bit down this time then, huh?
The reservoir's down. So far, our wells are doing well, but we need to start thinking of next year if we have a light winter. I mean, that's where Pineview's thinking right now is, I don't know what the Farmer's Almanac tells me. Jake can probably tell me, but it is something that we are sitting down and talking and trying to work through.
Something else that came up too was, people seeming to think that you couldn't use WaterWise landscaping, that you have to have grass in your park strip and things like that. I don't know if we could maybe, where we put on the website the information about, encouraging people to reduce their water consumption and that we're not going to ticket you for having a not so green lawn, maybe put some Xeriscape resources and things like that, and the section of city code so they can easily find it, so they know what they can do. Because I think people are starting to think about, if this is the new normal, well, what do we need to do long term so we can have attractive landscaping that's not going to use a lot of water.
The newspaper article that Pineview, where they talked about Pineview water being restricted, I went to the Pineview website, and it's got a lot of links for Xeriscape and how to use that. And Ogden's, if we did that, that would tell people that it does comply with our code.
Yeah, and put the section on there. Where
we'll draw attention to it. I think we have something on our site, I hope. We have been sending it in the newsletter, but we'll put something on the website.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to mention that next week you do have a work session with both Pineview and with Weber Basin to talk about secondary water. So it'd be a good opportunity to have further discussion.
Okay.
Any other comments, or if not, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion to adjourn from Councilmember Wicks and a second from Vice Chair Garner.
No. No.
No.
Sorry.
Councilmember Gochner.
Motion to adjourn from Councilmember Gochner and a second from Vice Chair Garner. This is a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. See, that's why people don't want to sit by me.